There's news in the NFL today, and it's time to break it down in the only way we know how. Hot Route style.
Earl! Johnny!
With our spin on football headlines with a mix of frozen tundras.
Let's be a cold weather team.
Neck rolls.
Boom!
And grass-stained jerseys.
The good old-fashioned guts was probably the biggest difference in the game.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hot Routes live show, joined as always by my friend Matthew Coller of the Purple Insider podcast. We're coming at you after a whole extra week off, so we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to dive into some of the state of some of these franchises that have some interesting talking points. We're going to preview Week 18. We're going to talk a little bit about Michael Penix. And if we have time at the end, we might get into some of the potential rule changes kind of on the docket for the NFL as well. So we have a very full show ahead. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Matthew, how you doing?
I just want to do this. Report is eligible for the show. That is me over here, Matthew, Purple Insider. I am eligible to co-host this show. So when it's reported who was eligible, it's me. Okay, just making sure that no other person is in the background or on the side. What a week for football. I mean, I think that so normally I exercise to some extent. I think that I have just plastered myself to the couch and done nothing but watch football or cover football, which I wish I didn't for the Vikings and the Packers game. I wish I had just stayed home for that one. But I've either been watching football, bowl games, NFL Saturday, NFL Sunday, or covering a game for pretty much my entire life for the last 2 weeks. It's been a great time.
Well, speaking of being plastered, I will admit I had quite a fun time watching the Green Bay Packers dismantle the Minnesota Vikings in person. I had to go back and rewatch that game on Monday because, New Year's Eve, we had a party downtown. We left in the third quarter. It was a grand old time out here in Minneapolis. Shall we continue with the NFC North discourse and talk about the Chicago Bears a little bit here as well? Things are just the entire division is actually, I think, becoming very fascinating right now. And the Bears have really gotten my attention in the last, I think, 6 or 7 weeks. I think we've talked about it a little bit. Like you could kind of see the signs of the defense coming along, but now Justin Fields and the offense kind of picking up their slack too. I titled the part of this segment here, the Bears aren't who we thought they were. They have been really a good team in the second half of the year. They just destroyed the Falcons in a snow game. I thought it had a certain aesthetic to it that was really impressive, just out there, just kind of kicking their ass from start to finish. Really a lot to talk about with the Bears. Where I wanted to start it here was they remind me a lot of last year's Lions team. And I think the narrative shaping up this upcoming Sunday probably helps that thought, where they started horrible, they've heated up in the second half, and now have a chance to Week 18 knock the Green Bay Packers out of the playoffs in Lambeau Field. And they, to me, could very well be one of the more hyped up teams heading into next season, but they have some really difficult decisions ahead. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what we kind of think the direction that they might go with some of these. And the starting point there is, of course, going to be the big talking point around the NFL world this week is, do the Bears stick with Justin Fields, or do they go and take Caleb Williams after locking up the number 1 pick in the draft with Carolina, stinking it up, getting shut out in Jacksonville? What do you think? Where do you stand on this?
I'm going to plant my flag right now that they will stick with Justin Fields and that they should stick with Justin Fields, which is surprising even to me, because 6 weeks ago, I would not have probably said that. And one of the tough things is not being a prisoner of the moment for everything in football. Brock Purdy has a bad game and all of a sudden he's terrible and shouldn't win MVP and on, right? Like right after we did that show about how good Brock Purdy was. But that's football, right? I mean, you just ride this roller coaster of opinions from week to week, and you try to figure out where am I doing real projection? Where am I being rational? And where am I just reacting to what I just saw? So, for example, the refs are bad this year. Are they really? Yes, that's not reacting to just what I just saw. And with the Chicago Bears, one thing that I have seen throughout the league this year that maybe is even more powerful than it's ever been is roster strength bolstering quarterbacks. And in the NFC specifically, there is not Dan Marino or Patrick Mahomes or Drew Brees or Aaron Rodgers or whoever that is like this unbeatable quarterback that everyone is going to be looking at going, I don't know how you catch that guy. And even Mahomes, we have seen his supporting cast really hurt him, although still double-digit wins somehow with MVS dropping every single pass. For Justin Fields, where it was a very unusual situation to have been drafted and then have your team tank. And who he's reminding me of, you made that Lions comparison, is actually Jared Goff when he arrived at the Lions. Now, Goff had a much better previous history than Fields, but his team tanked when he got there. That's really hard to deal with. And I remember people saying the Lions should draft Malik Willis and, have him be the future quarterback for the Lions or something, right? Because they thought, the guy's not that great and he's not going to be able to take them anywhere. And then the roster strength increased. And once the roster strength got there, it was like, okay, actually, this guy is a good quarterback. And I think with Fields, what you're seeing is his confidence finally come to fruition, his supporting cast finally come to fruition, and him being able to put those tools together. And I wonder, your guy, Jordan Love, who looked absolutely phenomenal in person the other night. What if Justin Fields had the Jordan Love treatment and was just showing up on the scene right now? We'd be pretty impressed. So I'm not throwing out his previous history, but I also think that if you continue to build this supporting cast with Marvin Harrison Jr., build the line, build the defense, which has been incredible, and you're already a 7 to 8 win football team right now, you have a chance to be a very serious contender as soon as next year with Justin Fields. And if Justin Fields can't get it done, then you are a team that everybody's free agent quarterback's going to want to play for, that you could draft other guys, take other shots at, and have somebody work out the way it has for San Francisco. That is the way I'm looking at it. Like, build up that roster that's going to be there for a 5 to 7 year window. And if Fields can't get it done, then try something else. But how do you pass up on the quarterback that everyone is saying is the generational talent? Not totally convinced on that, but if he does become that, then you're the ones who passed up on that. It is like a great position and a very difficult position all at the same time.
Yeah, I know it. And I'm very glad you said that, because I'm going to go in the other direction here. But I think everything you said is very valid. And I think the most interesting thing there is Marvin Harrison being, is that an option for them? They would have to go against the grain and stay put and take him number one in a world where that's really never been done. These teams always seem to trade out, get the picks. And if that's their decision, I would prefer that to them trading down to like 6 and not getting Marvin Harrison, because he is a very special prospect that I think changes the conversation. So I do want to point that out. I just don't know how realistic that is based on how these teams operate. But for me, I look at this. I just this weekend got through my whole Caleb Williams evaluation. I watched every single drop back of Caleb Williams' entire season this weekend, put together my whole evaluation. So I have solidified my opinions on Caleb, and he's not a generational prospect. And I feel kind of similarly with when I did my Trevor Lawrence evaluation, where like the hype was up here and then you watch him and you see some flaws. But I also think there's a little bit of prospect fatigue as well, in that there is still a lot to like. And I really was impressed actually with the way he finished his season. He had the Notre Dame game, and a lot of people were kind of criticizing that he can't play in structure and he's making mistakes against great defenses. He really improved upon that as the year went on. He's still 21 years old. And at the end of the day, I see a quarterback that a worst case scenario is probably going to be at least as good as Justin Fields, who, look, he is coming off his best game of the season against a Falcons defense. I'm not saying it wasn't impressive. I'm not saying he's not a good-ish starter at this point. But I still see a guy that holds the ball way too long, still has had ugly passing performances in the last couple of months. And my perspective on Fields has changed a little bit, in that I don't think he's ever going to be anything less than a starting caliber quarterback. I think that's pretty clear. He's a high variance quarterback, but is he ever going to be a top 10 quarterback, a great quarterback that you can count on to, get you through a playoff stretch? And, I look at like Geno Smith in that Seahawks game, the second half, he just has his shortcomings in big moments. And I feel like Fields is likely to always kind of be that kind of quarterback. And to me, it's more about the upside situation where I think you take Caleb Williams and you could get a Josh Allen, you could get a Patrick Mahomes. And I know this year has reshaped the way we look at that. And I think you make some good points, but as I'm projecting back into the future, as Joe Burrow's healthy again and Aaron Rodgers comes back into the picture and the Chiefs draft some weapons, I think we'll probably get back to that state of football where it's still going to be to your best advantage to have that kind of quarterback, especially in an NFC North where, like you said, Jordan Love looks great. The Lions aren't going anywhere. We're going to talk about the Vikings later too. I just think when you put it all together, you're looking at, okay, your options are Caleb Williams on a rookie contract versus Justin Fields, who you're going to have to pay next year. I think Fields is playing well enough that you're going to get pretty good draft capital for him. I think you're probably looking at, maybe like the Giants' second round pick or something like that, like a top 50 pick plus probably another mid-round pick in the future. That's still a good return. It's not what you're going to get for number one, but you're still looking at a starter, maybe two, if you draft well in the fourth. You get that extra cap space that can be used in free agency. Maybe you can attract a guy like Danielle Hunter now with that extra cap space or something like that. Maybe you can go make a big move. That compared to paying Justin Fields and 3 first-round picks that would be, great prospects, young players that you're not guaranteed to hit on all of them. So I just don't look at the Bears roster and say they're a disaster. I think the O-line's actually very underrated right now. They've drafted very well at that position group. I think they do need a wide receiver too, but that can be found in an incredibly deep draft class. I think they have a great running game, a great group of running backs. Defense is in great shape. I think they need another edge rusher, which they could probably use their other first-round pick to bring in a guy like that. So, I love their linebackers, love their secondary. I just think this quarterback position is something they've got to get right. I think God is telling them when Lovie Smith blew the last game of the season last year for the Texans, gave the Bears the number 1 pick. They get the haul from the Panthers. I think it's all set up for them to finally get this position right. And it's not to say Fields isn't a good player or that it's a horrible decision. I think especially like you said, if they just stay put and take Marvin Harrison, that could get really interesting because he could be a truly elite elevator of the passing game in a way that other receivers probably won't be. Again, I don't know how realistic that situation is, but just for me, I don't think it's that hard of a decision because having just watched Caleb, he just does so many things better than Fields. He really does. Sees the field better, moves better in the pocket, better arm talent. He does a lot of the same stuff in terms of play extension and doing all that stuff. So that's my full thoughts on the situation.
And the thing about this debate is that I think you can really work with a lot on both sides of it. Because if you think about Fields, you've invested so much time in his development, and you're finally seeing it come to fruition with him. And even if there are passing shortcomings, the running cannot be ignored, that he is the best running quarterback since Michael Vick statistically. I mean, really an absolute force from a running perspective. I don't know if that'll last until he's 37, but I think over the window that you're about to whip open, you could start talking about being a legitimate contender for the Super Bowl next year with the roster you're capable of building. If you bring in Marvin Harrison Jr., add another pass rusher in the draft, and then take all of that cap space that you still have because he's on his rookie deal and pour it into this year, and you can go into next year similar to how Detroit went into this season and say, oh, by the way, we have a much better defensive mind at the helm, assuming they're not firing Eberflus, than Detroit does, where they are still struggling on defense. And so you can talk about it as we can continue to grow on what Justin Fields has done. And even though he will be flawed, and even though he will be frustrating at times, it's a little bit Jalen Hurts-ish, as in you drafted him, and then you developed. And the first year was like, And then the second year, it was like, oh, okay. And then, you get him to the third year, and now he's a star. And part of that is A.J. Brown. And part of that is this great offensive line. And prior to that, last year was their great defense, which is kind of fallen apart this year, but still working with a lot of stuff to take a quarterback who I do think is a better passer than Justin Fields. But the high end of Fields throwing, as you saw against the Falcons, holy bleep. I mean, this man can make some serious throws. So even though like all of your points are totally legit, and I'm nodding and I'm like, yeah, I agree with that. Definitely. And Caleb Williams is, I think, a better prospect than Justin Fields was. The one thing that sticks in the back of my head about Caleb Williams, though, and it could be Drake May also, is what if the guy sucks? I mean, because some number one picks have really been so bad that, and Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold, like this has happened to their sort of sister AFC franchise that can't find a good quarterback. So if you move on from Fields and you trade him to Atlanta, let's say, and I don't know, maybe they'll trade him to the AFC, but let's just say Atlanta for the hell of it. So you trade him to Atlanta and then you pick Caleb Williams, and Caleb Williams cannot process the NFL game at all and is a diva and is bad and just has the same struggles as Zach Wilson trying to run around and make plays when you can't do that in the NFL. And then you are back to square one. You are back to Trubisky land, where you take a Super Bowl caliber roster and you can't win with them because your quarterback's not any good, or your kicker, doinks a field goal or whatever in the playoffs, as they did in 2018. But there is a major risk that if it goes wrong with the guy you pick, you are absolutely done, fired, and you will have wasted all of the time that you put into it, as Ryan Poles, of building this thing up. The thing about Fields is, if he can only get you so far, just kind of like Jimmy Garoppolo-ish, you could still draft other quarterbacks, you could still take other shots, or you could
But they're
still
not
be
going to get the number one pick again.
No, not with the number one pick, but when the roster was what it was, San Francisco didn't even need the number one pick. They actually only needed the dead last pick. I'm not saying that's something you can count on. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are Matt Stafford situations that come up. There are other quarterbacks who get drafted and develop, like a Jalen Hurts, a second round pick, not a 7th round pick. So it's sort of like, it's either your whole franchise rests on this one decision to pick Caleb Williams, or you will still win with Fields, but can you get over the top? And you'll have more opportunity to find out what that is. But I think the arguments both work. I think that your route is probably the route they planned on the whole time. And then Justin Fields just threw a total wrench in that in like the last 6 weeks by playing really, really well.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot lower on how Fields has looked this year. Like, the game against Atlanta, like, he made some really good throws. Most of them were when he had protection and DJ Moore was screaming open on a slot fade, which was his first read. The Falcons defense is nothing special. His only other game over an 80 passing grade this year was against Denver in week 4, which was a historically bad defense at the time. The good defense he's ran into, Green Bay week 1, he played like crap. Tampa Bay week 2, played like crap. Kansas City week 3, the starters came out in the second half because they were down 52-6 or whatever. The rest of these games, Denver, Washington, Minnesota, he has not played well against Brian Flores' defense at all. He's looked horrible in both those games, in my opinion. Detroit, twice. Detroit's defense stinks. Cleveland was really bad in that game. 3 turnover-worthy plays, 2 interceptions. He played the Cardinals, and he just played the Falcons. Like, I still see this as a quarterback that when he goes against great defenses is going to let you down, and you're trying to become a great team. And I still look at this as a quarterback that's going to have a lot of issues down the road. But it's going to be fun as hell to see what they do. And the debates are going to be endless with this thing until they make a decision for sure. Let's talk about a little bit more of a disappointing team here, the Seattle Seahawks, who I honestly think might be the most disappointing team in the entire league this year. Taking injuries out, because you lose your quarterback, it just sucks. It's a good excuse. Seattle, they don't really have a good excuse. A lot of people were picking them to maybe win this division or go further, and they're not even going to make the playoffs at this point, most likely. They still have a chance, but they'd be, backwards crawling into the playoffs after losing to the Steelers, and they still just can't get this defense right. And I guess the question for me to you is, do they fire Pete Carroll, and how do you go about doing that, given where he sits in that organization?
This is the curse of mediocrity. And there are a lot of teams that live in that place where you have enough on your roster to convince yourself, and can you tell I covered the Vikings? To convince yourself that you can be competitive. And the Vikings have done this. The Steelers have done this a lot. I give them credit for drafting Kenny Pickett. It didn't work out, but they took a shot at that. But the Steelers have lived in this world for many years now, where every year they're competitive. And I think Mike Tomlin's as great as anybody else thinks Mike Tomlin is. Huge respect for him. But when you don't have that quarterback situation truly figured out, this is what ends up happening. And maybe the worst thing that could have happened to the Seattle Seahawks was Geno Smith being good last year, because what that did was convince them that, okay, we've got our quarterback for a couple years. Maybe we could develop somebody else or draft somebody down the line, but we're actually going to compete next year. And when a team makes the playoffs at 9-8, it might as well be cocaine. Like, they go into the offseason like, we're a playoff team. We need to win next year. And you're like, bro, you were the 7 seed or whatever. You got pummeled by San Francisco. Or it must have been 6 seed, whatever it was. You got killed by San Francisco in the first round of the playoffs. But they're like, no, we got to draft a running back in the second round because he could play, and he's got to fill an immediate need, and we got to sign this guy and sign that guy, and we're ready to go. And they totally lost where they were living, which was a rebuild after Russell Wilson. And has it been a bad coaching job? I'm not sure. I think they have probably more talent on defense than they've made out of this. I had them as a secret Super Bowl pick at the beginning of the season. So, of course, yes, I feel quite disappointed by this team. I reached for it. I took a shot at the stars and I failed. But Geno Smith is kind of who we thought he was, which is he's better than a backup, but he's not as good as a top flight starter who can guide you if other things go wrong. And now, what is the answer to get out? I don't know, because they're not in a position to talk about Caleb Williams at the top of the draft. And they're not in a position to talk about anybody who's going to be an immediate impact player unless they get super lucky. How are they going to stack up the defense enough? They tried to trade for Leonard Williams. I'll take the L on that one too. I like that move. And so that didn't help them. It did not change. You were right about that. It did not change what ended up happening to their fate. And now escaping the middle, I think, is the hardest thing in football. Because you could just get stuck there, and your owners think, well, what if we just sign this free agent? And if you win 9 games, they expect you to win 10 the next year. So it's, by the way, the chat lighting up on the Seattle pick. I was taking a shot. I mean, everybody was picking San Francisco, Baltimore, right? Like,
Hey, you're not the only one. I know some other people that were really high on Seattle. You're not alone. So let's take it easy.
Please let me know in the comments. Let me know all the Super Bowls that you've nailed from the start, unless you picked the Patriots all those times, or Kansas City, I guess. So I took a shot at, but to your point, the headline is correct. The disappointing Seattle Seahawks is totally right. I thought they were going to be much better this year, but they kind of are who we thought they were going to be last year. Last year, they just overachieved by a little.
Yeah. They are so tough. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I think if I do have full power here, and that's the big question, because Pete Carroll is just kind of this roadblock for any sort of decision that you want to make. And it's just, I definitely think at this point, assuming they lose or don't make the playoffs, it's definitely at the point where you got to just get that out of the way so that you can make the right decisions to get this thing on the right track. He's supposed to be a defensive he is a defensive mind above all. He's kind of forfeited that role in the defense. I think that's problematic right there. But this defense hasn't been able to get right since Gus Bradley left, since Dan Quinn left. Like, they've had the talent and have not been able to readjust. And he really is not bringing a whole lot to the table in terms of, other than, I should say, like, likability from the players. I think they do enjoy playing for him, but I do think if you're trying to figure out what the next step is, I would be looking at a Brian Flores or a Mike McDonald from Baltimore, and kind of trying to tap into the defensive talent that is on this team. Because I do think if this team's going to turn a corner, it's going to have to be getting that defense right. I think you've got Geno, you've got these incredible receivers. You probably need another piece on the offensive line, but I do think they have it in them if they just aren't giving up 25 to 30 points a week to actually turn this thing around pretty quickly. But again, their defensive scheme is just garbage. They're kind of doing the soft, squishy, scared zone defense thing that has been destroying a lot of these defenses. And yeah, I think if you bring in a McDonald or a Flores that could turn that into a top 10 defense overnight, like easily, honestly, like I don't even think that's all that debatable. I think this team could turn things around, but you have to make some really tough decisions in terms of getting Pete Carroll out of there. So that's kind of my answer, but I don't think they're going to do it. I don't think they will. I don't think they have the kind of guts or a big enough ego in the building to kind of make it happen. So I don't know where they go otherwise.
Well, and another another issue is that Geno Smith's price is going up next year for his salary cap hit. So do you do what? I mean, you kind of got to ride it out with Geno. And
I think you do.
Yeah, you have to through next year. And so the question is, like, even if you improve the defense, if it's not like San Francisco's or Baltimore's, if it's just good and not great, like, is that good enough to be anywhere different than what we're talking about right now? And some of the chat comparing it to what I said about Chicago and Justin Fields, I think Chicago has a very good chance to build a Baltimore or San Francisco caliber roster with all the assets they have, with the draft picks, the cap space, and all that. That's really the Fields argument that I'm making, which I'm not saying anyone's wrong for wanting Caleb Williams, by the way. I think, like, if you're making that case, I mean, you're making a really strong argument. But that's where it's different here, where it's, if you told me that Seattle was one off season away from drafting at the top and adding to this roster, I might say, you know what, change that coach, get that number one type defense, and maybe Geno can get enough. But that's not where they are. Like, I think even Brian Flores, he might be able to get them into the top 10-ish, but I'm not sure they have the assets to make themselves a top 10 or top 5 or totally true impact week to week type of defense.
Yeah. They're kind of missing that Montez Sweat. They're missing an offensive line. I agree. They're not quite, they don't have the big players at some of the key positions that Chicago does. All right, let's talk about those Vikings that should come as pretty easy territory for you. But I think it's time we have a little bit of a discourse here. My first question for you, Matthew, is why did they start Jaren Hall? Do you think they saw something in practice that they liked, or was this truly just a panic button? Literally anybody else get in there and see what happens?
I wrote to the other day, the uncertainty was the point. The not knowing is better than knowing. Do you know that Nick Mullins is going to throw 4 interceptions every week? Yep. Do you know that Josh Dobbs can't run your offense? Yep. So what else we got? Hey, this guy's never tried. And many teams have failed throughout the years trying hey, this guy's never played before. And the Vikings are the latest on that list. Every once in a while, Brock Purdy shows up, but usually it takes special circumstances of which the Vikings do not have. Jaren Hall did not show anything in training camp or preseason to believe that the results would be anything but what we saw against the Packers. He got sacked about one every 5th or 6th drop back in preseason, struggled quite a bit in training camp. We thought that there was a good chance he would get cut. So what he looked like was not a stunner. It was really down to we need to play somebody else other than the guy who just threw 4 picks and threw the game away. Is it a little reactionary? Yes, but I think that the outcome that they got isn't a bad one for their future. The outcome that they got was a way better draft stock than if they had won 2 games and gotten in the playoffs. I mean, this team needs to draft in the top 10. They need to pick Michael Penix to throw to downfield to Justin Jefferson. And then they need to spend like crazy in free agency to fill the holes of which there are going to be many with free agents that they have. I don't know if they'll do that because Kirk Cousins might look more enticing now after watching terrible quarterback play to the owners. But I think that when they got to Minnesota, that the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, Kevin O'Connell regime had a clear-cut plan for how they were going to deal with this quarterback situation long-term. They didn't extend Kirk last year, and now you lose against the Lions, and you're picking like 10th. And that is a place where you're within shouting distance of potentially Jalen Daniels, or if it's not him, then it's Penix, or if they like McCarthy, or if they like Bo Nix, or whoever you want. I don't know who they'll like. But that if that's the plan, then whatever. They started Jaron Hall. We'll never remember it. We'll only remember the guy that they drafted 10th. And instead of making the playoffs, getting destroyed by another team in the first round on the road, and then drafting 22nd. That would have been a very bad outcome. So I think that was in the back of everyone's mind after they were fully sure that Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins could not do the job.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And they are better off for it, like you said. I didn't want to like take giant victory laps or anything, but I did push back on a lot of Vikings fans were like, start Hall. And I'm like, man, I watched his tape at BYU. This was the same offense that Zach Wilson came from that, we all saw what happened there. And Hall was a quarter as good as Zach Wilson. Constant overthrows, slow on his reads, like fun highlight tape. I think a lot of people watched his highlight tapes on, the running around, sidearm throws and all that stuff. But, yeah, I don't know. I just it was rough to watch for sure. Now I was at the game, as I mentioned, and part of the game that I do remember is Kirk Cousins taking his shirt off, banging the drum before the game, and I'm like, he wants to be here, man. He really, I think, loves Minnesota, and he's got family roots here. Are you kind of convinced he's just gone, or where are you at with that? Because I could definitely see the Vikings wanting him back for a year or two as they do hopefully draft a quarterback still, but just kind of solidify that quarterback position. And, I could see him taking a little bit of a discount to stay here as opposed to going to like Atlanta and kind of rerouting the end of his career here. Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm very much on the fence here about what happens because you could see the owners not wanting to take a step back and saying, well, why don't we stick with Kirk Cousins, but draft a quarterback in the second round so he doesn't feel unloved as if you took one in the first round. We could still draft an edge rusher to replace Danielle Hunter and yada, 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 repeating history of what they've done several times before. But I also think I go back to two things. You hired Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah to be smarter than this. If you didn't want someone smarter than this, then you should have kept the previous GM, Rick Spielman, and just kept doing the same thing over and over again. Also, if they wanted to do this with an extension with Kirk, it was right there on the table last year. They had the Vikings had a price. Kirk Cousins' side didn't take it. And that's how they're in this position right now. So what's interesting about this is, at least my understanding is, this decision has to be made before he would hit free agency, because if he hits free agency, then the $28 million dead cap kicks in. So we're going to have an answer on this fairly soon into, February or March or whatever is going to happen. But if I'm Kirk, I'd want to know what's out there for me. And so his agent is going to have to go to the combine in early March, late February, whenever it starts this year. And he's going to have to find out what's the deal here. Is there interest? And you know what? Tampering is going to happen. Like Atlanta, what's your interest? Las Vegas, what's your interest? Pittsburgh, what's your interest? And he's got to come out of there with numbers to go back to the Vikings and negotiate. But I think if you're the Vikings, I don't see the point, because we were just talking about Geno Smith and being in the middle and all that. That's exactly what the Vikings are. And if they're just going to assume, and this is why I think the Packers game might have been good for them. If they're just going to assume, oh, well, we'll just run it all back and we'll just add a couple players and Kirk will come back and it will all be great. And we won't fumble as much. They lead the league in turnovers.
Yeah.
All that could be true, but maybe you win 10 games, get to the first round, get beat, go home. I mean, can you build a championship level roster around a $40 million contract over the next 2 years would be the question. No way in hell. In my mind, no way in hell. You are signing your death certificate for the next few years if you bring back a quarterback that expensive who is not Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, etc. So I think and also they're in a position to roll the dice. And if they don't get it right, I don't think they have to get fired, which is right. Like if you were to draft Penix and it didn't work out, you don't have to just be like, oh, well, it didn't work out, you're fired. But if you bring back Cousins, and you miss the playoffs 2 years in a row because you go 9-8 or 8-9, oh, you're fired. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I lean still toward not bringing him back. I don't see why they would do it, but the owners could always step in and be like, we don't like how that Packers game went. We want Kirk back.
Yeah. Well, I think with our next topic here, Michael Penix, we've already alluded to him. I think how you feel about him, and do you think you're in striking distance to draft this player, kind of changes your whole decision. Because number one, is he a good enough prospect to take with a first round pick? Do you think he could be a franchise type of quarterback? That would be a question. But then also, like, do you think he's ready now? Because I actually think it's not a bad decision for the Vikings to, if Kirk wants to come back 2 years, 80 million or whatever, which sounds expensive, I know, but that's the level he was playing at. It's probably going to cost something close to that, maybe a little less, but you bring Kirk back, and then Penix can kind of do the whole, Packers sit and develop type of thing. Or do you just feel like, nope, this guy is a 24-year-old rookie. We think he can hit the ground running in this offense, and you take him. So the dude was balling out the other night. And I actually last Friday did a kind of first look film breakdown of Michael Penix, and I'm not going to lie, I was really unimpressed by him in that game. That was the first match against Oregon. And I saw a guy that was really not climbing through progressions or reacting to pressure or doing a whole lot of high-level quarterbacking other than a really good arm and really good accuracy. But just watching the broadcasts last night, I mean, this, fast forward 2 months, and he's just dissecting the defense and, climbing the pocket. What's crazy is you pull up his passing numbers against pressure in the last 2 weeks, including the Oregon Conference Championship game against that same defense that I watched in that film breakdown. Under pressure, he is 13 of 26 for 250 yards, a touchdown, a PFF pass grade of 86, 4 big-time throws, 1 turnover-worthy play. To put that in context, a passing grade that high under pressure is unbelievable, because those are supposed to be the throws that you would expect a negative outcome from the quarterback. And if you look at like the greats like Mahomes, Rodgers, Brady, like in the NFL, they're usually sitting around a 65 passing grade against pressure. Like that's how much pressure impacts the quarterback. And for him to have basically an elite passing grade in the biggest moments, now it's not a very stable metric. It tends to have a lot of variance, but it does show you that he is really handling the blitz well, where he's also into those high 80s against the blitz. And just, I mean, that poise in the pocket is incredible. And to have the arm talent and accuracy that he's had definitely changes what I thought about him from that first game I watched on him. So, it's definitely lining up for him to go there. I think it's a great scheme fit with his just accuracy and arm talent to just get the ball in these guys' hands. You have a coach that's going to, create those easy looks for him too. So it does feel like it's heading in that direction. And then the question for me is just, do you bring in Kirk as a mentor, or do you just roll with Penix?
If you bring back Kirk, you have to try to win the Super Bowl. That's the way I look at it. And I know you like the Packers, so you think you should draft a quarterback and have him sit for 14 years, and then when he's 37 years old, you finally start him. I know, but that's not how it mostly operates. But I also think, like, the thing about Aaron Rodgers that's different, and why we should never compare this situation to anybody else, is that Aaron Rodgers could win the Super Bowl every single year of his life. He could have won the dang Super Bowl this year if his Achilles had stayed together. Like, he's one of the greatest players ever. So with him, you can't just like get rid of him and bring in the next guy when he could still win the Super Bowl for you. You got to try to transition out of that a little smoother. There's no evidence whatsoever the Vikings could win the Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins. It's never come close. And this team has won 3 playoff games under its current ownership, which goes back to the early 2000s. I mean, you have to shoot higher. They've had 1 playoff win since they signed Kirk Cousins, which, by the way, was coming off of reaching the NFC Championship. And the whole idea was that he was going to take them over the top. So why, coming off an Achilles injury at 36, at $40 million a year, as you laid out, would that make any sense at all? And if the roster was ready, if Kirk was on Dallas's roster, I'd be like, okay, draft the quarterback, pretend you're the Packers, or how about like KC that everyone loves to reference? The reason that they did that is that they could have won the Super Bowl with Alex Smith that year. It was a great football team. They won a bunch of games. That's not where the Vikings are at. Like they just are not. They're a 7. They with Kirk Cousins, they're a 9-win team. Instead, they were a 7-win team. Who cares? So with Penix specifically, though, I like his arm, as everyone likes. It's the anticipation. The anticipation is a huge deal with Kevin O'Connell's offense. But his makeup, the way that he handles himself. I mean, this guy walked out onto that field, the Superdome, probably the most intimidating place to play in the world, and just was like, bomb. Like, just like, first, right off the bat, just bomb, let's go. We've seen him in tough games. I love watching guys in tough games. They might look like crap, but how you manage that game that he played against Oregon State, he completed like 8 passes in a row because it was a monsoon. And Corvallis is not an easy place to play. And he just fought and battled and stayed patient. And he never is anything but even. Reminds me of CJ Stroud in that way. So I like a lot of things about his character's makeup, what he's been through to be here. It's going to be a talk for sure about the injuries and the mobility for sure. But pocket quarterback standing in, letting that thing loose sounds a lot like the Vikings to me.
Yeah, definitely impressed. And it'll be fun to see, like, does he become this like consensus top 10 pick? And, do the Vikings have to like move up to get him? It definitely feels like a good fit though. Like we've talked about how it's a very good spot for a young quarterback to go. So I would love to see it. All right, let's preview some of these big week 18 games. I think we will push the rule discussions off to a future show. You got a radio hit here in about 15 minutes. So the first game I want to talk about is, I know it's been a very NFC North centric episode today, but I do want to talk a little bit about Chicago at Green Bay. Probably the most critical game in the NFC this week, as Green Bay is the one in control of their destiny, going against Chicago, who's on a roll. And then if they would lose, that would open up the door for basically Seattle or potentially New Orleans / Tampa Bay. But Green Bay is a 3-point favorite in this game. Where are you going in this one?
Man, Green Bay, what a roller coaster for this year.
Yeah, it's been up and down all year.
I'll tell you, with Jordan Love, that was a different human being that I watched at Lambeau Field earlier this year. So in command, so confident, so in control. And someone named Bo caught a bunch of passes I've never heard of. And he looked excellent. But that Chicago Bears defense is now nasty. They are a nasty group, and I think it's going to be hard for Jordan Love.
Yeah.
I mean, as confidently as he is playing, but we have seen some good teams, some decent quarterbacks go up against them and have some struggles. When the Vikings went up against them earlier, even before Montez Sweat, and I'm not talking about the Dobbs game, but even Kirk Cousins, they had like 200 yards offense in that game. And the only reason they won was because Tyson Bagent threw an interception at the end of the game. I feel like this is going to be one of those things that you remember for a long time about Jordan Love, one way or the other. Do you go into the offseason with like, man, what a good year, bud? Or wow, like this is the guy. And let me tell you, when he threw a 50-yard pass through the air off the back foot with that little pivot tweak thing that Aaron Rodgers does live, I was like, that's something the Vikings are going to have to deal with.
I think a lot of people saw that throw and were like, God damn it, I don't want to do it. But like Collinsworth did it perfectly on the broadcast. He was like, let's just say it. It is what it is. Like, this is Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. Like, very few quarterbacks make that throw. Yeah. I agree. It's a huge game for Love, he looks like a top 10, potentially elite quarterback. Like, this was his best game last week. That was as high as a level as you can play quarterback. It's not just the improvisational and the exciting throws. He had all of the answers against a Brian Flores defense that's been confusing quarterbacks all year long, and he was getting the ball out really quickly when he needed to. It really was special, but this is another big test. Like you said, the Bears are going to present a whole different type of scheme against them. So it comes down to that. And then on the other side, this is huge for Justin Fields. I mean, we had the whole debate early. I was talking about how, Fields, when he's gone against great defenses this year, has not looked good at all. And I'm not saying the Packers are a great defense, but they are 5-0 against Justin Fields. And this is the type of system that is catered to play against a quarterback like Fields, who does not like to take the underneath stuff. They're going to try to keep him in the pocket and, confuse him with rotating coverages and all that stuff. And for all of Joe Barry's issues, this system has had a ton of success against Justin Fields. So I think if you're going to stick with Justin Fields, you need to see him come out against the system that is catered to his skill set, and he's got to provide different answers and win in different ways. So it's just a huge stakes in terms of the quarterbacks in the NFC North. I think the Packers have shown that they match up really well against this Bears team. This is going to be their toughest test in the modern regime, but I would expect that the Packers win this game in Lambeau. If it was in Chicago, I might go the other way.
What a great game. What a great game. These are the two franchises with so much on the line. For Chicago, I think there's a lot on the line here of how everyone feels about Fields, about how they feel about their future. Eberflus, you win that game, and it's comparable to what you said about Detroit. Also, your comment section is phenomenal. Never heard of Bo Melton. I so much have never heard of Bo Melton that they give us in the press box what they call the play card, which has everybody's position. It's a whole depth chart for you for the Vikings and for the other team. He wasn't even on it. So like that. So when number 80 caught a pass, I was like, who's number 80? I don't even see number 80.
You would have to be you'd have to be like a draft, and like deep draft enthusiast. He was like a sleeper that a lot of people liked. He was a big Brett Coleman guy. So anybody that follows Brett definitely knows who Bo Melton is, but I can't blame you for not knowing who Bo Melton was. He went in the 7th round of Seattle, didn't make the team. He's been on the Packers practice squad for 2 years. Talented player, and was a fun draft prospect. But no, it's not your fault for not knowing who Bo Melton is.
Good for you, Bo. Great game.
All right, so you're gonna side with Green Bay if you're picking this one?
No, I'm gonna pick the Bears.
All right,
just for you. Just entirely to troll you. But I really do believe in Matt Eberflus and what he's doing with the defense. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult day for Jordan Love. The Packers are probably the slightly better team. I don't know. That's a tough one. But I've been watching the Bears defense closely. I think they've been fantastic over the last month. So it'll be a great test for Jordan Love.
One other thing before we move on is very curious for Jair as well. Getting to come back here after the suspension, big matchup against DJ Moore. They've been having talks about do they move on from him?
It's a coin flip decision, you would say.
Gosh,
just leave him on the.
I'm going to be ranting about that on my podcast tomorrow for sure. Goodness, they backed it up. I'll say that they backed it up by winning, but that could have been a disaster if Justin Jefferson was just running free all week. But yeah, big game for his future too, and he could be a critical piece to, if he can take out DJ Moore, I don't see a whole lot of ways Fields is going to be able to attack Green Bay. So big matchup to watch there. We got Buffalo at Miami. I think this is going to be one of the biggest like public bet one-sided things. I think everybody's going to be on Buffalo. And believe it or not, I'm on Buffalo. They're 3-point favorites in this game in Miami. Miami just lost Bradley Chubb for the season. I believe that's the second time this year that they've lost a star edge rusher in a blowout to a lower body injury. That's just a brutal pill to swallow. I think the Bills, a closet take of mine too, is that they were pretty sloppy last week against New England. If you watch that game, I think they were looking ahead to this game against Miami, thinking they could kind of coast by against the Patriots. And I think that a little extra week of prep might come in handy here as Miami had to deal with Baltimore last week.
I also think that, and maybe this has become a trope at this point, but every time Miami plays a good defense, you don't really get the results of when they play a bad defense. Hot take there, but that's really kind of been true. Even with Baltimore, they started out that game hot and then just couldn't get anything going from there. Roquan Smith made an incredible interception. It kind of seemed to throw them off their game. And it seems like the Ducks have to be in a row for that offense to operate, and you could throw it off. And man, can you imagine if you were an author writing the book of the Buffalo Bills season this year, and you got to the turning point and you're like, how do I explain this? a story came out 4 years ago that Sean McDermott said the most bizarre thing ever, and somehow the team seemed to galvanize based on that. And then they got rolling after that. Don't ask what he said. You don't want to know.
You don't want to know.
But it's weird because I've believed in Sean McDermott as a really good football coach for the whole time he's been there. I think this was a franchise in complete calamity and disarray when he got there. They are a Super Bowl contender year in and year out. They fought their way back from a lot of drama over the last 2 years. And here they are. I think this is the one that they need to win for Sean McDermott. The one that matters, the one that gets them into the playoffs and gives them a chance. And if they are in the playoffs, I am not wanting to play Josh Allen with Sean McDermott calling that defense. So yeah, I will pick the Bills as well. But this is a big one. This is a big one for Buffalo.
Yeah, all eyes on Sean McDermott. They're big, matchup type, like a heavy scheme game going against that Miami unit. Supposedly McDermott's supposed to be able to bring, a lot of high IQ game plan against that type of thing. So big thing to watch there. And then, if they get that, not just sneaking into the playoffs, but get home field and make teams come to Buffalo, they're going to be a lot of people's Super Bowl picks if they win this game, I think. So huge game there. We're both going Buffalo. Houston at Indianapolis is kind of the last true stakes game. I believe the winner of this is in and the loser is likely out. Do you know if that's true?
I think that if Houston wins, they are in. So I don't know I don't know what happens on the loss, but that's how I know it is, like if they win, they're in.
And I think for Indy as well, they're winning in because they would get to 10, and I don't think anybody else has that. So this is a true winning in. It's in Indianapolis. Houston looked amazing last week with Stroud coming back in, just didn't miss, nothing was, sorry. I just noticed we still have the Michael Penix thing up on the screen. But yeah, I mean, CJ Stroud was phenomenal. Just throw in, throw out. And sorry, I'm just trying to get the right graphic here. I don't have it for this, but I'm gonna take the Texans. I also think the Colts really lean on their run game, and the Texans' run defense has been fantastic. So that's gonna be a big thing to watch. Is the line of scrimmage. The Colts' offensive line has been really good lately. It's been a long time since these two teams played. Anthony Richardson was still healthy when these two teams last met each other. So 1 point spread. I will side with the Texans, but I would expect that it's going to be rocking in Indianapolis, and this is going to be a big test for CJ Stroud. Not that you would really knock him if he doesn't win this, but if he does go in and win, he deserves a lot of credit, I think, without Tank Dell and Laramie Tunsil, I think, is questionable too.
So according to the comment section, if Pittsburgh and let's see, that must be if Pittsburgh does what, but loses and the Bills lose. I see. If Pittsburgh and Buffalo lose, then the Colts and Texans could both be in. Okay.
So
but
the Bills can be out?
I guess so. Bills loss might not be necessary. Okay. Well, see, this is without the playoff machine to click through.
Yeah.
That makes it harder. The way that I remembered in my brain was if they win, they're in. So we'll go with that. It's a big game. The Texans with CJ Stroud have just been a very dangerous team offensively, and that's hard to say for Indianapolis. Like they're a downfield passing team even without Tank Dell, because this man can throw a football over the mountains. And his leadership when he's been in there of the offense has just grown and grown as the season has gone along. And now it looks like this is not a rookie quarterback. This is a veteran star player quarterback. Mm-hmm. And with Gardner Minshew, it's always kind of been this, like he either grinds his way out somehow or it's kind of a mess. The Texans defense has really come along as the season has gone along, except for that one Joe Flacco thing that happened. But for the most part, a ton of talent. So I would lean 100% toward the Texans. If the Texans do not end up in, massive success of a season for them, though. Agreed. All their top prospects came along. They have so much to work with for the future.
Yep, and injuries derailed them. They, I think, for sure would have been in without him. So yeah, I have the playoff predictor up in front of me. The Bills can miss the playoffs if they lose. Pittsburgh wins at Baltimore, they're going to be sitting some starters, I think. And if the Colts win, then the Bills are out. But if the Texans the Bills kind of need to win. It does come down to that. So I didn't even realize that they were in danger of missing the playoffs. So I guess that take for me is still in play potentially. Let's go.
Okay,
those are all
real
the
quick
key
question.
ones. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have another one you wanted to talk about? Because I had a quick funny question at the end of the show.
No, ask the funny question. Go for it.
Okay. So the owner of the Panthers threw a drink on the fans and he got fined. I just saw Schefter tweeted like $300,000 or something. What fan base would you throw a drink on?
Oh man. Can you go first while I think about it?
There's only really one choice. And I mean this in an endearing way because I love these people. The Philadelphia Eagles. I have been to Philadelphia a number of times, including the NFC Championship game 2017, but several times since. I've seen them boo their own team in the first quarter when they have a 3 and out.
Yeah.
I have seen, but the passion level is so absurd that when you go there, it's part of the sport to see all the jerseys that they wear because they have an amazing array of old jerseys that people wear. They go nuts for everything, but they go a little too nuts sometimes. And I think I'd just be cooling them off a little. All right, cool off. Stop throwing full beers at the opposing fan base. Stop trying to fight everybody in purple.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of purple goes there anymore because it's a little bit of a scary scene sometimes. So Eagles fans,
Right.
I appreciate that absurd level of passion, but cool off. Throw a drink on them.
Yeah, maybe if you could put me in bubble wrap first, I would do that, but I would be a little afraid to pour a drink on
you'd
someone.
be in the hospital.
I might actually die if I did that in an Eagles game. But I agree in terms of behavior, Eagles fans deserve to have drinks poured on them the most. In terms of the fan base that has most recently been harsh on me, that I would love to just splash a little, drink on, would be the Detroit Lions fans. That have just been ruthless towards me all season long, even though I've been back in the Lions for 2 years before this year. All I said was I wasn't a big fan. Like, I didn't like their draft. And I think some of that has come to fruition. I mean, they freaking nailed the tight end pick. So, like, that has thrown a wrench in the whole analysis. But, hey, the Jack Campbell pick, yikes, man. Still would have gone a different direction there. So I'll throw a drink on you, Lions fans, just because you've thrown a few on me throughout the season. But I think we're in a good place now. I had Detroit 5th in the power rankings this week. All right, you got a big time radio hit. You got to get out of here.
In South Dakota. So South Dakota radio, what's up?
I am curious if there's anybody in the chat that is going to be tuning in to the South Dakota local radio.
I'm not 100. I'm not. If you listen to the Nate Brown show in South Dakota, you're gonna hear more of me very shortly.
Fantastic. All right, great show. Thank you, chat. You guys really showed up today, so I appreciate that. And we'll be back next week, Matthew. We good to go?
I will be here. Yep. And we'll be talking about the eliminated from the Vikings playoffs probably.
Okay, sounds good. I might stick around and talk about a couple more games here as you leave, but we'll see you next week.
Well, thanks everybody, and I feel like it's an honor to have Hayton chats. So
it is an honor. It is an honor.
It is.
There's some saying about you haven't made it till you've been hated or something. I don't know.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks, Marcus. I'll catch you next week, buddy.
All right. See you, Matthew. All right, guys, I do want to just go through just a couple more games. We ran out of time at the very end there, but there are still some big games. I think we hit on the biggest ones with like real playoff implications. But the Rams-Niners game is interesting. The Niners are 3-point favorites, and the Niners sound like they're going to play their starters, whereas the Rams might have some decisions to make there. And I just think it's who wins this doesn't really matter all that much in terms of seeding. That the Niners are locked in. The Rams are either going to get the 6 seed or the 7 seed. They're in. But I do always find start-sit decisions fascinating. And I think both teams, it sounds like they might play this right. Because if I'm the Niners, especially for a team that lives off of the physical brand of football that they do, and they're kind of like a high-intensity bandwagon's not the right term for it, but they seem to feed off their own momentum. I'm not taking 2 weeks off of football if I'm the Niners, even though they're the same team that, injuries costed them the end of the year. But I'm at least playing the first half, go through the process, get the pads on, get fired up for game day, get out, go hit someone. And then if you get to the second half and, you feel like you've accomplished what you need to, maybe you pull the starters. But I do think the Niners should absolutely play their starters. I do believe that we've seen way too many teams that get that 1 seed come out flat. And it doesn't always happen, but it certainly has as well. And then for the Rams, a team that you got some, let's face it, they got some injury-prone players. They do. Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, even Puka Nacua is a guy that fell in the draft because of injury concerns. You only have 1 week off. To me, it's like, would I rather? I don't even know if their opponent, who they play, matters. But to me, it's like the Rams have got to stay healthy. They've accomplished everything they need to get to the playoffs. So I think if you're the Rams, you probably do sit your starters, and you probably lose this game. But you're going to get a lot of playing time for a lot of these young pieces here. And then if the Packers would end up winning in this situation, you're also conceding that you're okay basically going to Dallas instead of going to Detroit. And that was the other question I had on this game is, does that really matter to you if you're the Rams? Is there a big difference between going to Dallas or going to Detroit? It's a tough one to answer. I do think Dallas is probably, with what they've shown at home this season, a little bit scarier. But going to Detroit with that environment, that's not going to be easy. But I think I would much rather play Detroit if I'm specifically the Rams, because of, Dallas's defense against the Rams offensive line could be trouble for you. So we'll see how the Rams sort through this as a big decision for them to make. Do they play in an effort to avoid Dallas, or do they accept that they're fine going to Dallas? So that who wins this game doesn't really matter, but there's a lot of things on the line with that one. And then Seattle at Arizona. I wanted to talk about this game because it's not just assumed that Green Bay wins. Seattle can very much still make the playoffs and salvage something out of this season. We talked a lot about them earlier, and I think even if they sneak in as a 7 seed by beating the Arizona Cardinals, I still don't think it really changes the disappointment of the season, but it definitely makes it feel at least a little bit better to be in the playoffs. But at Arizona, they're only a 3-point favorite. It goes to show you kind of the state of the Seahawks right now. And if they lose this game in Arizona, that makes your decision so much easier. And you might even be rooting for that if you're a certain Seahawks fan. If they lose this game in Arizona, you 100% get Pete Carroll out of there. I mean, that is just tragic. They could still very well win this game, though, and still miss the playoffs, though, if Green Bay beats Chicago. In terms of the matchup, I don't love it for Seattle. Arizona's running the ball really well, and that was what really did the Seahawks defense in last week. Was, you got Devin Bush out there at linebacker. I don't know if Jordan Brooks is what his health situation is, but Devin Bush looked horrible. Their run fits were just brutal. I think the scheme is not doing them any favors in Seattle. And Arizona was running all over the Eagles' front, and that could really cause some problems for Arizona, who's playing with nothing to lose right now. And Kyler's looking good. You got Jonathan Gannon coming out, kind of hyping up the press, saying Kyler's our guy. They picked up Michael Carter, who's like the perfect complement to James Conner, who actually looks freaking fantastic. You got playmakers in Arizona. Great to see Michael Wilson making plays. So, it means more about Seattle's future, like long-term future in this game, than I think it does like, can they get in the playoffs and go on a Super Bowl run? Like, look, if Seattle had to go to Dallas, I know they played Dallas tough, I guess the last time, but I don't expect them to really back that up in a playoff game. So yeah, I don't want to just write off Seattle, but man, if they lose, it's going to look ugly. And then you just have the NFC South games, which I really don't have strong opinions on. I think both the Bucks and the Saints take care of business. The Bucks are going to Carolina, who got shut out against the Jags last week, basically just beating the ball into the defensive line all game. Bryce Young just had nowhere to go with the ball, was getting sacked all game. And, obviously he wasn't playing great or whatever, but I think his PFF grade was like a 63, like kind of goes to show you, like he just was just trying to be along for the ride in that game against Jacksonville. That's the same exact system that Tampa Bay runs after Jacksonville hired the coordinator from Jacksonville. So I fully anticipate that Tampa Bay will have defensive success against Carolina and find a way to win, even though last week the Bucs offense kind of came to a screeching halt back to earth. So Carolina's defense is frisky, but I do think Tampa Bay takes care of business. Carolina's just, trying to get to the finish line at this point. And then Atlanta at New Orleans, for what it's worth, I think New Orleans has found a little bit of some of their mojo last week. I mean, probably the most complete performance. Derek Carr played probably his best game on the season, and the defense really, really clicked in. So I think with Atlanta spiraling, I think New Orleans probably picks up the win too. So, the NFC South is kind of a joke. I didn't rank any of those teams in my playoff caliber tier, but I think Tampa probably wins, and then that's kind of the end of it. I don't see them hosting the Eagles and winning or anything like that. I guess it's possible. The Eagles are losing to everybody right now, but I just wanted to go through the rest of these games. That's really all we got, and I really appreciate you guys for watching. We'll be back next week. I will have the Fully Inflated Football podcast tomorrow as well. We're going to do a full Week 17 game recap. A lot to talk about there as well. So make sure you subscribe to the Fully Inflated YouTube channel or the audio podcast, wherever you get that. And going to be working up a little Caleb Williams film breakdown too, kind of like I did with the Anthony Richardson one this time last year. So that's going to be a great video. Looking forward to putting that together. Thank you guys. Have a great day until I see you tomorrow for the podcast. Peace out.